we are literally a capital provider for a farm all the way to their harvest. And we have to bridge them if they can't get to their harvest. So we are looking at farms walking up to death's door months before a harvest, and we see farms dying every day that we can't save. One, two, three.
Coming up on The Modern Acre, we're talking financial solutions and retail trade protection with the new CEO of ProducePay, Patrick McCullough.
The Modern Acre podcast explores the latest in business, investing, technology, and sustainability in agriculture, and we're your hosts, Tyler and Tim Nuss. If you'd like to dig deeper with The Modern Acre, be sure to check out our membership community, The Modern Acre Co-op. The Modern Acre podcast is presented by Pinion. In today's challenging ag environment, the success of a farm rises and falls based on making sound decisions. Pinion advisors recommend evaluating your farm data regularly to maximize profits and identify threats to your bottom line. If you don't have time or resources, Pinion can help. Farmers have entrusted Pinion with their businesses for 90 years. From ag-focused tax and accounting strategy, legacy planning, and FSA program guidance, to business management, land advisory, sustainability, and more. Explore your options at pinionglobal.com. Tim, this episode is exciting for you because we're talking the produce industry, produce trade, which was, your original career back in the day, some decade or two ago. This has got to be pretty exciting for you.
Yeah, this is a fun one, reliving my early career selling produce. And I remember early in my career, like you're just following the season, selling produce and how dynamic these markets are. Like we're in April now, that's typically when the California cherry season starts. And when the season starts, there's just no supply, so the price is sky high. And then as supply equalizes, the price comes down. And then at the end of the season, when there's a glut of supply and product isn't moving, the price falls up even further. So it's like really interesting to see companies like ProducePay start to innovate in this area. Like it seems like it's harder than it should be, Ty. Like every day you're calling 5 different packers. What's the price on this? What's the price on this? And there's so many different sizes and grades, and there's not a lot of stability. So it's like hard for the producers, the grower packer shippers, where they have an army of salespeople trying to sell the crop. Retailers are confused because the pricing is changing. They can't just lock in a price on most commodities. So ProducePay is basically trying to circumvent that process because there's a lot happening in this kind of messy middle, Ty.
Tim, tell me how you really feel.
It would be a lot easier just to have a season-long price, and I get why like growers are reluctant to do it because they feel like they're missing out when the price gets really high, and contrary, when the price is really low, it protects them. But there's just been like a huge reluctance to move in this direction in the industry.
I think just having like a first principles mindset on the agriculture industry is super important. I think there's a lot of examples of this where, why do we do it this way? Like there's a lot of these examples where technology can really disrupt the status quo, and we'll see where ProducePay goes. But it was great to get an update from their new CEO, Pat, on the business, how they've been really innovating and developing and evolving the business model. So we get into all of that and all of the takes around this messy middle, the brokers, and disrupting really the whole ecosystem. So you guys are going to enjoy this conversation. Let's jump in with what's top of mind.
There's a lot of moving parts in produce these days. The weather is definitely throwing curveballs left and right. We see a lot of credit challenges for farms. We see the peso working positively against the U.S. dollar, which is not good for our Mexican farms. So there's a lot of headwinds that we're helping farms with. And, that's, I think, how we live and breathe every day is how do we support the farms to get to their harvest.
The world of produce is like insane. I feel like I understand like 10% of the realities of the global produce industry. So I can imagine there's a lot on your mind thinking about how you play in that. And we're excited to dig into that specifically. But Pat, would love to learn a little bit more about you. Who are you? What's your background? And what's the reason you're in agriculture?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. So my father grew up on a farm in Iowa. They were a corn, soybean, cattle, and hog farm. So when I met our founder, Pablo, a little bit more than 3 years ago, I kind of saw my father's journey in, this younger guy that was looking for some leadership help. So I jumped in as an advisor really because I saw Pablo's plight being similar to my father's and very motivated, to help the plight of the farm. That's our true noble cause at the end of the day. And Pablo originally 9 years ago saw an opportunity to bring structured finance concepts to produce, which, are two opposite ends of the world. And frankly, there's really nobody else thinking like that or ever has thought like that. I have a structured finance background. I was a corporate finance person before I became CEO a few times. And I saw what he was doing and I really thought it was smart. And we're now taking it even further all the way to retail. So, part of the cool bit about Pablo and my partnership is I'm a little bit more of a pure financial engineer. He grew up on a farm. He's a farmer, but, has the MBA from Cornell and, knows his way around structured finance. So it's pretty fun to actually solve an industry problem, lack of capital with, methods that, were invented in other places like renewable energy or electricity, markets. We're taking a lot of energy structured finance concepts and applying it to produce. And it's kind of weird. You'd ask yourself, well, what is electricity and produce, how can they be applying the same solutions? And if you think about electricity, it's perfectly perishable because storage is not economically viable yet at scale. So if you can have a 5-year futures market that's liquid with electricity, and if you can have collared swap derivatives, insurance products, reinsurance products that manage, parametric weather, variation, why in the world couldn't you do that in produce where we actually have weeks or months before our product perishes? So, we've brought a lot of those concepts here. I believe we've talked to the majority of the biggest financial institutions in the world, the majority of the biggest insurance companies in the world, and we've tested this theory. Why wouldn't some of these renewable energy concepts work in produce? And everybody's nodding their head like, yeah, you're onto something there. You could create bankability in produce if we can succeed at this.
Super exciting stuff. I can't wait to dive into this new retail piece. I spent most of my career in fresh produce working for marketing companies, and it's a grind. Like every day when you're trying to sell an apple crop, every day the price is changing. And like at best, sometimes you get like a week-long price or 2-week-long price, but there's huge variability. And so you just have to be on top of things. And then the retailers are pushing for more longer-term contracts. And so it's always this kind of constant tension of like, the retailer would probably love to have a year-long price, but from a grower perspective, like they feel like they're giving up too much, or they don't know if the crop's going to be there, and you're trying to help bridge that gap. So maybe just talk to us about the evolution of kind of playing that role at retail.
Yeah, you're exactly right. And this goes back to my renewable energy reference. One of the reasons that the solar and the wind guys have so much capital at such low rates is they have a 30-year, in general, power purchase agreement with an investment grade take or pay construct. So they know the demand is there if they can invest in the supply. Interestingly, it dawned on us that if you look at the big retail balance sheets, they're all investment grade too. Walmart AA, Costco single A, Kroger triple B, Amazon's got to be A or better. If we can connect to those companies structurally, or even a cash control that could spring to that balance sheet, the ABL providers that provide balance sheet to our farms through us are much more comfortable, and they can go a lot bigger and they can go a lot lower rate. So we're doing a lot of stuff like that. But what I just described requires retail to change. We've had conversations with some of the biggest retailers in the United States, and when we talk about these concepts, they're intrigued and they say, well, what do we need to have, or what do we need to do as retailers? And we say, number one, you don't have to use your own capital. We know you're not into the emerging market advances of bank facilities. We know that you don't want to pay a higher price, that you want price stability and understanding and clarity. We just need you to do your job earlier. It's literally like if you could give that purchase order or something with contractual teeth, if it was a fixed price, and if it worked for the industry, then we could make a market here. And interestingly, I think produce might be the only thing that works this way in grocery stores. And if you really think about it, like your Kellogg's box of cereal, it's made on a fixed price basis. It's made to a unit of demand. Even if you think about the butchered cow that becomes our beef, that cow is butchered to a unit of demand and an understood price. Produce is completely the opposite. The blueberry bush is ready to be harvested. When it's ready to be harvested, it has nothing to do with whether there's demand there or not. And that creates price volatility in produce that we don't see anywhere else. And I think that's where the reluctance to go to a fixed price model actually comes in. It's that we eat about the same amount of salad on a Monday as a Thursday or February versus July. So demand's pretty flat in produce. Super Bowl, guacamole, okay. But you get the idea. And then it's the supply side that's doing this thing because it's not matched to that demand. And the price action is correspondingly almost a perfect inverse negative. So what we do is we aggregate that data. We look for those moments where price spikes and supply is short. And then we investigate, is that shortage of supply structural, meaning the right stuff isn't planted in the right place for the right time? Or is it a weather event or a one-off event that's not structural? And we look for those structural recurring shortage of supplies and high price. And we attack that with capital. We try to put our capital in those moments. We're doing that with May, Sonoran table grapes for the benefit of 4Star, our partner, and many of the big retailers in the United States. And we went ahead and we pre-purchased that inventory, not to take title on and to take ourselves. We're not in the business of brokering or distributing, but we knew it was valuable. We knew we wanted our capital on it, and we knew that could be a linchpin to have a real conversation with retail if we consolidated that precious fruit, which could leak out anywhere. And it might not even come to the U.S. if the pricing doesn't work. So long way of saying we think cracking that code matters deeply. And I'm optimistic. I'm seeing on avocados, I'm seeing on table grapes and a few other commodities, a real interest from retail of giving us real confirmed prices much earlier than historically.
And is this something that like the growers, the producers, they're already like, they want this, they need this? Or do you have to do some convincing on that side of the table as well?
It's interesting. Avocados, I think retail's more comfortable than the grower. Table grapes, it's the opposite. And what does all this mean to me as a bit of an outsider who came into produce 3 years ago? It means nobody trusts each other. And it's a highly volatile price, in this industry. And, I think I saw watermelons were studied to be 500% annual price volatility. I think tomatoes were 400%. Table grapes, interestingly, were 200%. But the average annual price volatility is 117% in produce as studied in 2022. That's like 3x cryptocurrency. That's like 4 or 5x crude oil. So like wrap your head around that. This is the most volatile commodity price of anything in the world, which means it's absolutely the hardest to organize and get people to commit to each other.
Totally. And I think like with that volatility, there's a lot of like the messy middle of like brokers, distributors, where pricing speaks and there's opportunities to make money when you have that volatility. And so there's probably like some incumbents in the space that are reluctant to just have like a fixed price because it takes a lot of the like messiness and bartering back and forth on a day-to-day level where some of the profits are made in that kind of situation. So being able to take a step back and market a crop as a whole, I think is really interesting. Outside of grapes, like what other crop categories are you targeting? You mentioned avocados, but like what other regions you think this kind of a model makes sense for?
Yeah, it's another great question, Tim. So the interesting thing is we started with doing some dimensional analysis around, okay, where is the most price volatility? Where do we know the shortage of supply complaint is coming from retail or the U.S. consumer, if you want to go all the way through? And then we started looking for, are there like partners that do want direct farm to retail as best as we can deliver that? Versus those arbitrage houses you're talking about that we think are value destroyers. So like if you say, who are we really trying to address? It's the speculators in the middle. We don't think they deserve to exist. We think they're making this far worse than it would be if you had a value added packer in the middle and a great farm and a great retailer. But as we're going through this and figuring this out, we see any annual bloomer, meaning, like table grapes that you can double crop in Brazil, but really nowhere else. Avocado trees, though, can do 3-4 times a year. So that, I guess that's an exception because we're doing avocados next. But berries, melons, tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers, those are on the short list to hit this year if we can. And regionally, it really is that Southern Hemisphere, equator, Northern Hemisphere to deliver 52-week supply. And that was another kind of obvious, but for us, it was a startling realization that we probably have to operate in every large farming nation in the world to support the 52-week supply needs of the big European and the big U.S. retailers. And that was for a Series D maturity company. That was the moment you take the big gulp and you say, oh, wow, we're talking about being in 6 continents here eminently. And we're talking about, lots of money flying all over the world to support farms. And it's a difficult thing to manage that growth. I'm sure you imagine.
Totally. Pat, would love to get into the business model a little bit. How does ProducePay make money in this whole equation?
At its most basic, we are a capital provider. We're a software provider, and we put agronomists in the field to do both things to protect the capital, but also offensive things to unlock demand or revenue optimize for the entire vertical. The way we do this is it does start with a very early capital advance to farms. So we are one of the few players in the world that will advance a significant amount of capital with only harvest as collateral, future harvest, pre-input costs. Okay, so we don't see hardly anyone playing there. And I don't want to say we have no competition, but remember, the banks have come in and done their thing with the land and the capital equipment as collateral. We're not technically debt. We're trade finance advancers. And, from an accounting perspective, we're pre-purchasing inventory. But the reality is the collateral is the revenue that will be paid on that delivered harvest. We then put agronomists in that field, and we make sure pruning, fertilizer, bud break, growth is happening correctly. Pre-harvest decisions on, is it on Walmart spec, ready to rock in or not? And we actually broadcast with technology objective, and it's optics-based spec adherence or spec differences to whomever's retail spec it's being grown for. And we generally will show up with the strictest spec, and that's pretty easy in most categories to identify. And then we want to make sure that we identify the real spec if it's different than that. But we signaled last year to one of the largest retailers in North America that we're slightly off the length of table grapes at a couple farms, but we were good on sugar, we were good on color, we're good on skin condition, diameter, et cetera. That retailer waived that tier 1 spec for 3 weeks and paid the farm the tier 1 price because they had no fruit for a month. And that was in the shoulders between Chile tapering off and Mexico coming on. So that's an example of revenue optimization. That retailer would have lost those few weeks of demand if we had grown that to spec. And they were ready for it. They took the marginal hit to spec and they delivered the economics, which was really cool. Now, in the past, you don't see that level of transparency to know even, where's my fruit coming from? Because it might get sent into an open market. It might get rebagged. You might lose full traceability. That's what, people are up against when it's a short supply season. But now we're actually in the field sharing that information. And we're super proud that last year we took a 9% retail distribution center reject rate down to 0.5. We just did 1.5 million cases out of South America into 3 of the largest 4 U.S. retailers, and we did not have a single DC reject. And it's because of this quality control, visibility, and objective tool that we've built, which is really important. Now, we've built the shipping module and the order management module that has contract, PO, invoice, receipt, and it's all tracked back to the row in the vineyard, to the box in the packing house, to the shipping container until the DC drop off. So, you can see what we're doing here. We're making markets because we're starting to organize fruit and vegetables for specific retailers through 4-Star. We're unlocking demand because we're consolidating shortage of supply moments for the benefit of a few retailers that want to work with us earlier at the expense of everyone else who doesn't. And then, of course, the most important one is we're realizing there's a hole in April and May for table grapes. We need to invest in developing Brazil supply to bring it in, or planting in Peru to go late, or planting more in Mexico to go early into May to address those windows. So as we become part of the solution in terms of supply and demand planning, market making, matchmaking, and providing the capital to make it go, we're getting audiences with everyone, and we're starting to see, all parts of the vertical lean in. But we're kind of approaching this like the vertical is our customer. Even though we're farm first because they're wearing most of the risk in this, they're the ones that, need the capital. Because it's still analog and it's push supply, and possession is really important, right? If you have the grapes versus you want to buy the grapes. So we focus on the farm, but for the benefit of the vertical. And we know if we're not delivering real value to retail, we're never going to get the farm pulled through. So we really have to sell our value to the whole stack.
Pat, I'm curious, have you guys looked into like food ingredients and processing markets? Like on our farm, that's a majority of what we produce goes to big, large processors that are turning those into ingredients that like a Heinz ketchup would be buying our processing tomatoes from the processor we work with. The contracts are annual, but there is some variability. There's supply and demand, and like some years they're prorating acres because there's too much demand in the marketplace and so forth. Have you looked into that side of things of like working with big food brands or processing markets?
We have looked into it, and we do support our farms. You can imagine a farm is a complex organism where you might have 85% of your, blueberries at a tier 1 spec and 15% aren't holding it. And then you have to find other markets because, tier 1 retail is the highest standard and the highest price. So, but the farm has to deal with that. It's like selling the whole tree in the avocado business, right? So, retail will come in and they'll cherry pick the perfect avocados. Well, what are you going to do with that, deformed avocado? Maybe that's the avocado oil company that you're selling into. We haven't done a deal like that yet, like we have with 4Star and retail, but we definitely are thinking about it. The issue we have is there's so much to do. We're starting with the biggest, chunkiest spots, which tends to be the grocery retail. And it's the highest standard too. So we can deliver more value with our visibility, our quality visibility platform.
What's been like the biggest challenge over the past few years getting into this business, transitioning to CEO? What comes to mind is kind of your biggest challenge through it all?
The biggest challenge, and it's a surprising one for me. We do not have difficulty creating value or selling value. We have a harder time delivering value. And every industry I've worked in, it's normally the opposite of that. Like we invented the widget, and figuring out how to sell it and differentiate and get it out to the market can sometimes be the harder problem to solve. Because we're building a back end of structured finance solutions for the first time in an industry where people understand what we're doing because it's similar to the energy markets, they're still concerned it's a first of its kind, facility. So managing the back end and the value delivery of this system is far more complicated than I think anyone would expect. We're figuring it out. We're getting it done. But imagine now you're in multiple currencies. You're all over the globe. You're bringing Wall Street, big banks into a world they've never played for the first time. It's hard. We can sell a deal in 6 days. And fund it if it's ready to go. To get new ABL capacity on could be 6 months. It's a long process to get those lenders comfortable.
Pat, we met in person a few weeks ago at World Agritech. It was a really awesome show. A lot of sessions going on. Any takeaways from that show and kind of zooming out at the industry as a whole? Like, what are you most excited about in agriculture and ag tech?
Yeah, the blockchain and AI discussions were really interesting for me. Like, I know everybody was throwing it around as buzzwords when it first came out, but now you're starting to hear real application. And I just think there's a lot there, especially for produce in an industry which has so much volatility, and matching real-time demand and real-time supply is not something the industry has achieved yet. So I was sitting there and my brain was going wild about all the applications I think that we can all do and bring to this industry to stabilize it and make it easier. I mean, what's at stake here, and people don't often, get this real. We are literally a capital provider for a farm all the way to their harvest, and we have to bridge them if they can't get to their harvest. So we are looking at farms walking up to death's door months before a harvest, and we see farms dying every day that we can't save. And it's too late. So, we're worried about 2050 there being a food supply shortage relative to population growth. That actually assumes today's farms exist in 2050. And I'm telling you, they're dying. And it does not seem like big business or government cares a lick about it. And that bugs us. So, part of our noble cause is, hey, let's fix the industry, but we can't do it alone. It's far too big for us to even take a decent sized chunk of it. So we put our playbook out publicly. And we've done that for a lot of reasons. We don't think a lot of people can imitate it, but we also want to be leaders in terms of redesigning how business gets conducted from the farm to the U.S. consumer. Because if let's say the average Mexican farm doesn't have to worry about that down year and prices cratering, they could have a healthy business with routine margins. They're not going to, be the wealthiest business people on the planet. But this is really a story of survival, not of wealth creation for the average farm. We see the U.S. Credit guys leaving the U.S. farming space too, and they're having much bigger problems than they've ever had. I think you know the stories of the almond farms, and we see it in table grapes in California. It's difficult. And, the industry has to come together. Retail plays a role in that. Marketers play a role in that. We play a role in that. Banks play a role in that. But we're clearly not doing enough because there's too many multi-generational farms that are failing right now.
Pat, what's your food or ag hot take?
Yeah, I really do believe that most industries understand the value of strategic planning with price and volume commitments. And most of our produce industry fights that. And there's a lot of reasons that we talked about: price volatility, weather, disruption. There's a million things going on. But I really think everybody has to sit down at the table together and sort this out. And it can be helpful for a younger, earlier stage, disruptor like ProducePay to ring that bell and say, hey, everybody come around the table and let's talk about this. It's very hard to change, 30 years of organizations that were designed to every day wake up and battle over a spot price, right? And we're asking them, hey, don't do that anymore. Take the average of the last 5 years, let's settle it, and let's just destroy the spot market overnight. Everybody looks at you like you have three eyes and horns, but we're doing this. We're in Hermosillo, Mexico next week. We're bringing in retail marketers, farms, genetics guys. We're bringing in the trade associations, and we're talking at the most strategic, foundational level of why do we do business the way we do? Don't you think there's a better way? We don't need credit for this. We need everybody to come together and do this together because we can't do it alone. But, that's like the weird thing that we're trying to wake up the industry a little bit. And we know they can do it. We've seen evidence of it, but it's hard. It's very hard to change these organizations. And you imagine like companies the size of Amazon and Walmart, we're asking them to change how they do business. That's pretty ridiculous thought in the first place. But we really believe that's what's needed here.
Love it. I've known about this for a while, having worked in produce, and just like what you said, you wake up every day and you're calling multiple shippers trying to get the price, and it's just so spot market, and like no one really talks about this, and to have a company focused on it, I think is really cool. So love the kind of like redirection and opportunity here that you guys are focusing on here.
I was even surprised because I had heard before we entered Europe last year that the Europeans were better than the America's model, that they had 10-year contracts. And then when you go deep on that, and you say, well, hey, can the price change? Because I see you have a price. Oh, yeah, it can change. Well, why would it change? Oh, if the spot market fell, we'll rip that up and change the price. I said, well, how late in the cycle do you do that? Do you do that after that Kenyan fruit is on the sea? And the answer is yes. So it's like crazy. It's like, okay, well, it's a spot market over there too. So this is definitely a universal problem where we haven't cracked the price volatility challenge. And it really, in my opinion, comes from a supply mismatching. It's the supply side that needs to be rebuilt and match demand better. And then it'll be easier to start to think about, hey, don't worry, that price started high or it ended up too low. You might have won here and lost there, but on average, you're still doing fine. The farms are very willing to do this because they've been through a lot of distress with weather events in the past few years.
Pat, really appreciate you taking the time. Super interesting to dig into your model and just how you're thinking about the industry. As we finish up, how can listeners get in touch and connect with you and ProducePay?
ProducePay.com, and everyone's welcome. We're literally trying to do this with others and companies outside of our own. But, we're open for business on this type of stuff, and we believe in what we're doing. So we'd love to talk to people about it.
So, Tim, what'd you think?
Super fun conversation with Pat. It was awesome to hear about ProducePay, kind of new shift in direction, new opportunity focusing on retail pricing and the dynamics at play there. I think it's much needed in the industry, and kind of takes, like you said, kind of an outside first principles view on just like, why have we always done it this way? Why is it just so hard to move a crop when a lot of the variables are constantly, we know what the input costs are for a lot of these crops. Obviously, weather is a variable, but to kind of simplify this, I think is going to help both sides on the retail and the producer side.
Totally. I mean, I think it's hard, right, to disrupt something like this. I mean, we look at FBN, right, and the struggles they've had they ask the same question: why are we buying inputs this way, right? And they have a very first principles approach to it, but there's so much built up in the ag supply chain that FBN has faced challenges with, and it's easier said than done, right, to just disrupt how something is done. And we'll see how Produce Pay ultimately solves this problem and hopefully creates a solution that's net better for the industry. Guys, thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it as always. If you have ideas for guests or topics, please reach out. We'd love to hear from you. Connect about what you want to hear from us at The Modern Acre. Make sure, as always, that you're subscribed to the podcast player of your choosing. We're also on YouTube for the YouTube. Appreciate it, and we'll talk to you soon.